Good morning. How are you? Good to see everyone today. I have brought with me something that's very special to me, actually. I don't know about you. I'm in my mid-40s now. And if I think about the things I had when I was a teenager that I still have today, there aren't very many of them, but this is one of them. This is something that has come with me from England when I first moved to Australia, and it has lived in the top drawer of my clothing, wherever that was, ever since I was about 13. And it goes everywhere with me, and it's one of my most valued and treasured possessions. This box contains letters. Now, these letters were all written to me between 1991 and 1994. They were letters that I received from people I'd met on Pathfinder camps. And back then, it was before social media and emails and all of that. And so we would write, look, I've even got this one still in its envelope, and it's still got an old stamp on it, you see. And I would go to Pathfinder camps, and I'd meet other people from around the UK, and I'd swap addresses with them, and then I'd get home and I'd write letters, and I'd be so excited about when a letter would come in the post for me, and I'd run upstairs to my room and I'd open it, and they're some of my treasured possessions. I don't read them very often anymore, but I did read them a few weeks ago, and they did make me laugh a little bit because, you know, I was a kid. Well, these aren't what I wrote. I would love to see some of the ones I wrote. And maybe I wouldn't. That would be maybe a bit embarrassing. But they're a real treasured possession. And actually, they become more of a treasured possession because I haven't had a handwritten letter in a very long time. I might get a card. You know, sure, we get maybe Christmas cards or birthday cards, but a real letter that's not an email, that's not being read off a screen, is pretty special. Today we're starting a series called Choose Joy, which will be a 4-week series into the book of Philippians. And there's actually so much in the book of Philippians. I actually reckon we could do a series of 20 weeks and not run out of content. Okay, so I've been given chapter 1. We're certainly not going to cover all of chapter 1, because if we did, we'll be here till a few hours at least, right? So I do encourage you, though, because we're not going to be covering, and I'm sure the other guys who are preaching the remaining weeks will tell you the same, they're not going to get through the content of their whole chapter. So I encourage you to follow along and read the whole chapters at home. It is only 4 chapters, so it's a relatively short book. And if you think about it, it was designed to be read from beginning to end, right? How it would have originally been read is the guy would have got up in church and said, oh, we got a letter from Paul, and would have read from chapter 1, verse 1 through to the end of chapter 4, all in one go. And that's how it would have been heard by the people. So I'd love it if you could find some time in the next 4 weeks to do that. And also to read it maybe in a modern translation like the Message, which just gives a different take on it. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today, two parts. I'm going to first of all just give you an overview to the book, talk about who was Philippians, where was Philippi, who was writing, what the circumstances were, so you can sort of see the big picture of the book of Philippians. And then we're just going to dive into just a few verses in the first chapter. Okay, so what is Philippians all about? Well, you may have guessed from my illustration of bringing my magic box of letters that Philippians is a letter. It's written, as it says in chapter 1, verse 1, from Paul and Timothy, although Paul often refers to it as I. So it's like a letter from Paul, but we think of Timothy maybe as the scribe. And it's written from Rome. So it's written at a time when Paul is under house arrest in Rome. And the final chapter of Acts tells us he's in house arrest, and he's constantly surrounded by Roman guards. In fact, he was probably permanently chained, directly connected to a guard. And as we learn from the letter, the church in Philippi was worried about him. In fact, they were so worried that they gathered together. They made a sacrificial offering of money that they couldn't actually afford to create a gift. And then they agreed one of their members is going to go on this journey from Philippi to Rome to deliver this gift to Paul. I was doing a bit of, now remember, no planes, no trains, no automobiles back in those days. The distance from Philippi to Rome, about 1,200 kilometers. So it's just short of going to Brisbane. So about 100 k's short of going to Brisbane from here, right? And you're on your feet or maybe a horse, or that's about it, right? So, and it's across mountains, and it depends which way you go. It's 1,200 as the crow flies, but there's a big ocean in the way if you go that way, so you need to find a boat. Or if you go around, it's much, much further. So this isn't just a simple, I'm just going to pop over next door with, a couple of sandwiches we made up for you, Paul. Like, this is quite a sacrificial journey that this church has made to go to send this gift, to pick a person. What if we said, we want to help out with the Brisbane floods? We're going to pick Ewan, right? You're going to go up to Brisbane to help with the floods. All of us are going to donate, and then off you go on this massive journey. It's a big commitment that this church had made. So this is where Paul is writing from. He's received the gift, and he's writing from that circumstance. Who's he writing to? Who were the church in Philippi? Well, we find out a little bit about the Philippian church, the start of the Philippian church in the book of Acts. It was one of the churches that Paul founded. And we know some of the people in the church in Philippi because they're talked about by name. We know there's a lady called Lydia. She's a businesswoman. She was one of the first people to be converted in Philippi, and one of the key people. In fact, we know that the early church met in her home at the beginning. So you've got a professional businesswoman. You also have, and Acts tells us, a demon-possessed girl who Paul healed, who was being kept in captivity by a couple of slave owners because they could make money out of the fact that this woman was crazy. And Paul saw that she was demon-possessed, cast the demon out of her and set her free. And then when she was free, then the men were so angry because they'd taken away their source of revenue. They couldn't make money out of this crazy woman anymore, that they arranged for Paul to get beaten up, Paul and Silas at the time, and get thrown into prison. So you've got Lydia, the businesswoman. You've got the ex-crazy girl who's now recovering and dealing with all of, I guess, I don't know how she would have coped. And then you've got Paul and Silas in prison there. And I don't know if you remember the story. Their feet are in stocks and they're singing at midnight. That's a full story in itself. And along comes this massive earthquake and all the prisoners are set free. And the jailer comes running over, sees all the prisoners, thinks they've all escaped. He's about to kill himself, and Paul stops him and goes, no, I've kept all the people together. It's okay. No one has escaped. It's all going to be okay. And so then Paul converts the jailer and his whole family, and he baptizes them all. So these are the people who are receiving the letter, right? So you've got the jailer and his family. You've got the former crazy girl. You've got the businesswoman. Now, this is such a mishmash of people. I'm sure these three people weren't friends before Paul came to town, right? And yet the gospel came into their lives and created a community of seemingly random individuals that, but what a start to your church story. Like, how did Burwood come into existence? Oh, well, Paul came to town and we had the crazy lady healed, and we had, the jailer and the earthquake, and what a dramatic story to your church being founded. And what else do we know about Philippi as a place? Well, it is in Greece, but at this point it's a Roman colony. Philippi was named after Philip of Macedon, who was the father of Alexander the Great. It was an existing city before that, but it had a different name, and Philip comes along, names it after himself, and it maintains its name after that point. It was a military town. In fact, one thing that Philippi is famous for is that it popularized the Greek form of warfare called the phalanx, or other countries called that the shield wall. It was when soldiers would put their shields together to form a wall for protection. And this style of fighting was popularized by the Greeks. And so Philippi was known as sort of the place where, the phalanx really became popular. There's some evidence that some people might have done it before, but it was known for, its modern styles of warfare. as it was back then. We might think of shield walls as a bit funny nowadays. Maybe you've watched Vikings, I don't know. But back then, this was cutting edge. So at times, actually, in the book of Philippians, you'll see Paul use military style language. That's not to be surprising because he's writing to people who live in a garrison town. It's also, Philippi was also known as a place where Praetorian Guard veterans would go and retire. So the Praetorian Guard was the key inner circle guard who guarded the Caesar, the city, the main Roman guard. And they would often go and retire. So it was a bit of a retirement village for the veteran soldiers as well. So you had the great and the good of Philippi, and it had this Roman status at the time of Paul. And so even though it was in Greece, everyone who lived there had Roman citizenship. And so that was an important thing. And that's another theme in the book of Philippians, the idea of where our citizenship is, because the Philippians were very proud of the fact that they all had Roman citizenship, even though they were in Greece. And Paul makes the point in other places that your citizenship is more important about your citizenship in heaven. Okay, so Philippi is also a very rich town because there's a neighboring gold mine, right? So they had a lot of wealth compared to other surrounding neighbors. So you've got this prosperous, cosmopolitan European city with a diverse and still fairly young Christian community. It's believed that from those first events of when the Philippian jailer and the earthquake and all of that, it's probably about 12 years from when Paul's first trip to Philippi was, and from when this letter is written, when he's in Rome. And he's probably gone back a couple of other times too in his intermittent missionary journeys. A couple of other things about the book of Philippians. It's easily Paul's most affectionate and intimate letter. A lot of his other letters are filled with maybe admonitions or criticisms, or maybe he's written them because he's heard of problems in the church, and so he's wanting to write to address those problems. In the book of Philippians, he's not. He's responding to their gratitude. He's responding with gratitude to their generosity. They've sent Epaphroditus, who's been their messenger across this 1,200 kilometer trek with this generous gift that they couldn't afford. And he's writing this response of gratitude. It's a church that he really loves. I meant to put a map of where Philippi was up on the screen. I'm sorry. Can we just I'll just show you where it is. If we can just go to the next slide, please. I didn't think about clickers and things. Right, so this is where Philippi is, if you can think about where it is. Right, so it's in Greece, and it's up there. It's a coastal town in what was known then as Macedonia. And Rome's over here, where are they pumpkins? Where the pumpkins would be. I don't know. Okay, I want to talk now a little bit about the structure, the overall structure of the book of Philippians. It follows what's called a chiastic structure, which you may have heard that word before if you've heard other sermons that look in biblical structure. It's a common style of writing in the Bible. Chiasm means it's based from the Greek letter X, right, across. It's the idea of there being a central point in the middle of the book that the whole book is pointing at, okay? So it's quite clever literary style. I've got a slide that shows the chiasm, if we can have that up. Okay, so there's these points A, and then you've got a apostrophe at the bottom. They mirror each other. You got B and B apostrophe, they mirror each other. C and C apostrophe mirror each other. So if you see there, it starts grace and it finishes with grace. It's got glory and praise to God as section B, which is replicated in chapter 4. A point about rejoicing, section C, and rejoicing again in chapter 4, the C apostrophe. D, death in my body is gain. And then D, gain in the faith in the death of Jesus. They mirror each other. And then E, the central point in the book, joy and rejoicing. And that's, as you can see there, hopefully giving you lots of clues as to why our series is called Choose Joy, because that is the central theme in the whole of the book. And as you can see also from this chiastic structure, the central point in the whole of the book of Philippians is found in chapter 2, which is next week. So this is a teaser for next week. Make sure you come, because if you're going to follow us through the series, next week is the most important sermon. You can stop listening to the rest of what I'm saying now. Just come back next week and focus on chapter 2, because that is the key point. But then you'll also see from this chiasm structure that I've got like the equivalent of 2 sermons at the other end to cover off. And I was looking at it going, I actually really struggled. Like, do I try and cover all of chapter 1 for you? And I just decided I was going to be doing such a high level skim that I wasn't going to do that. So we're just going to drill into what on this slide is classified as B, this prayer of Paul's from verses 3 to 11 that we're going to look into in a bit more detail now. But please, I encourage you, go away and read the rest, because there's some awesome things in it. Okay, let us dig into these first 11 verses. And my slides are in the wrong order here. Okay. All right. Let's start reading Philippians chapter 1 from verses 1 to 11. Hopefully we've got the text on the slide, or please follow along on your mobile phones, or there are some people with paper Bibles still. How very exciting. I can see a couple. All right. I'm going to be reading from New International Version. Paul and Timothy, servants of Christ Jesus, to all God's holy people in Christ Jesus at Philippi, together with the overseers and deacons. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for you, for all of you, I always pray with joy, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. It is right for me to feel this way about all of you, since I have you in my heart, whether I am in chains or defending and confirming the gospel. All of you share in God's grace with me. God can testify how I long for all of you with the affection of Christ Jesus. And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God. Okay, Paul's prayer at the beginning of this book. It's a love prayer. Now, I don't know about you, but I know there are some people who really struggle with sentimentality and love. Some of you might just go, oh, like Valentine's Day, what a waste of time. Some of you might be big romantics and love a good love story, love a good romantic movie, have a bit of a cry over the Notebook, I don't know. But some of you roll your eyes at that and go, love, I got better things to do. Some of us get awkward even at weddings with some of those speeches, and we think, oh, too much information. You just guys keep that to yourselves. Thank you. And actually, it's in a way, we would almost think that Paul understands that some of us may be a bit cynical about love, because he spends a big section in this passage justifying why it's okay for him to be like this, right? And we'll get to that bit in the middle. If we look at verse 9, it makes the point there. The fundamental point of this chapter, if you say, what are you all saying, Paul, in verses 1 to 11, he's saying, this is my prayer that your love may abound. This is my prayer that your love may abound. So in some things, so that other things will happen and other things will happen. But the key point is your love may abound. And if you go back then to verse 7, this is his justification of why it's okay for him to love. He says, it is right for me to feel this way about all of you, since I have you in my heart. And then verse 8, God can testify how I long for all of you. In fact, he almost doubles down. Like if you're like not very good at love language, you might be like, ooh, Paul's getting a bit full on here. In this passage here, 7, 8, and 9, Paul uses all of the love body parts, okay? So in biblical writing, you can love with your head. So where it says it's right for you to feel this way, the translation here says feel. The actual word behind it is the word to think. It comes from the root of brain. So the idea is Paul is thinking. He's making an active choice to love with his head. Then, of course, it says he has it in his heart. We all know heart as a symbol of love. And in verse 8, where it says he longs for you all, it's the Greek word for guts, right? Which is where they believe that, your love, your emotions, they come from your guts. Okay, so in this passage, Paul is loving from his head, he's loving from his heart, and he's loving from his stomach. Okay, so it is an all-bodied love experience that Paul is feeling this way for the people. And he's thanking them at the beginning for their love. He's starting off in verse 3. I thank my God every time I remember you because of your, verse 5, partnership in the gospel. This phrase is really important. Your partnership in the gospel. This word partnership is the word koinonia, which I can't say, which is the word community or fellowship or that deep, special connection that the early Christian church had. In fact, I think we had a sermon last year that Rose preached on all about koinonia. I can't say that word very well, but I remember it. So this is not just when he says partnership in the gospel in verse 5, he's not just talking about, oh yeah, you helped out, right? He's talking about a true commitment, a true partnership, a true working together, this love that Paul felt from them by sending Epaphroditus with this gift. And this idea of partnership in the gospel, I was listening to a podcast which was it told the story of a couple. One of the members of the couple got cancer, and the other person was supporting them through that journey. And just as the first person got into remission, the second person got a different type of cancer. And so they swapped from being the patient and carer to the patient and carer, and they both supported each other through that journey. And it's exactly the same expression that they used as Paul is using here. They shared in each other's cancer journeys. Like, that's how intimate and close is the language Paul's saying when he's saying, you're sharing in my gospel ministry. He's not just saying, oh, you're nice and you're my mate, right? He's saying, like, you've actually intimately supported me. You've worked with me. You've got there, that we've got there together. And there's that beautiful verse there in verse 6 as well, a very famous verse that was illustrated in the song we heard earlier. If you look at it in context, it's Paul spelling out a story from beginning to end. He specifies the past. This is where we've come from. He says this is a work that God has done from the beginning. He mentions the present, their partnership in the gospel today, and that gives him a certain confidence and hope for the future. It's a stunning promise for dark days where we can't always see God's leading, to know that God is working out his plans. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2 echoes this when it tells us to keep our eyes on Jesus, the author or starter and finisher of our faith. So this verse has the same idea. God starts it. When he starts it, he will carry it on to completion. I know that verse has been a massive encouragement for me many times in my life. And I pray that it's an encouragement for you too. So, some of you joined us a couple of weeks ago when we had Bush Church up at Linda. And there we heard Wayne talk about loving one another. He spoke from John 13:34. A new command I give to you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Well, Paul here is emphasizing what Wayne was saying. This agape love that we are to have for each other, this fellowship, this community, this partnership in the gospel. This love is manifest in the community as the outward demonstration of the inward transformation that he who began a good work in you is completing. And what is this love? It's interesting if you look now again at verse 9. When Paul is saying, what is his prayer? He's praying that your love may abound For what reason? Well, so that you can make good decisions. Now, that's quite interesting. Imagine getting a Valentine's card that says, I love you and I hope our love grows so that we can make good decisions. You'd think that's a bit of a weird Valentine's card. But that's the point that Paul is making. Like, this isn't just some kind of gushy, sentimental love. It's love that results in actions. Now, this is not about making good decisions such as right and wrong. Okay, so it's not, do I go and get drunk and go to work while I'm drunk? Or, do I decide, do I love my mother or not? Okay, they're the obvious decisions. We should know whether they're the right thing to do or not. Paul's talking about choosing between the this or the that when both of them can be all right, given the circumstances. Paul is asking for love that gives us discernment. Now, as a principle, we may say going to visit my mum would be a good idea. But there are some circumstances when it's the right thing to do, and there are some circumstances when it's the wrong thing to do. And knowing the line of when that's the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, that is where the discernment piece comes in. Now, we don't like this sometimes. We wish that the Bible would be much more specific with what we should do, Oh, just tell me how much money I should give, and then I'll just give that. We don't like it when, God says things like, oh, I own everything, and so everything you have belongs to me. Then we have to make decisions and go, what do I do with this money? What about my time? Do I sit and watch a movie or do I phone my mum? Now, sometimes just sitting and watching a movie and relaxing is the right thing to do because maybe you just need to switch off for a bit, and that's the right thing to do. Other times, the right thing to do is go and see your mum. And figuring out that's what Paul is praying for. He's praying for the discernment to make the right decisions, to be able to make the right choices. And then you've got this interesting pattern here, the discernment so that. It leads to a pattern, as we can see here in the text. It's so that the wise choices result in fruit, so that the fruit produces righteousness, and so that God be praised. So we've got this cumulative output of having love in our hearts in the first place. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I see these sorts of texts about the fruits of righteousness, I think, oh, okay, so now the preacher's going to say to me, right, so you've got to love everyone and you've got to produce fruit, and that's what you've got to do. So, and sometimes you can leave sermons thinking, oh, I've just been guilted into the fact that I don't produce enough fruit and I don't love enough. But actually, that's not what Paul's not praying for them to go work on their fruit. He's praying for love to help them make good choices, because he knows that if they have the love to make the right choices, then the rest of the things happen. It's not that you have to work on producing the fruit. You pray for the love. And it's not you got to work on the love. He's praying for it because it's not necessarily natural for us. It's something that maybe we need divine help for. And so the challenge here is not to go out and work on your works. The challenge here is to pray for love, to pray for love that gives us knowledge and wisdom so that we can make the right choices. So, how do we become a church that Paul loves this way? Well, as I said earlier, if you were at Bush Church, you heard it already. We learn to love. We grow in love with knowledge and discernment, which leads to fruit. We partner in the gospel, and we make sure that all the praise and glory goes to God. So to love is we love to make excellent choices as we partner in the gospel. I encourage you this week just to start at the beginning. Don't think about all the works and the fruits that you need to produce. Don't pray for the fruits. Just pray for the love.